If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, campers. Grab your marshmallows and gather around the True Crime Campfire. We're your camp counselors. I'm Katie.
And I'm Whitney.
And we're here to tell you a true story that is way stranger than fiction. We're roasting murderers and marshmallows around the True Crime Campfire.
For at least the past 200 years or so, there's been a lot of debate about women and the role we're supposed to play in society. Historically, we've been expected to be the nurturers, the caregivers, the gentler sex, as we used to be called. We cook the food, we nurse the sick, we mind the children. Some of us are perfectly content in that role, but all throughout history, there have also been women who've chafed against these expectations. Some of them rebelled in a healthy, heroic way, fighting for women's right to vote, to manage our own money, to pursue careers. And some have rebelled in a darker, more toxic way, using the very tools of stereotypical womanhood, food and drink, to commit the deadliest crimes. Today, we'll tell you about two of those women. This is Poisonous, a grab bag of vintage bad bitches.
Case 1, Misfortune Teller, the story of Tillie Klimek. So campers, we're starting this one on a train from Milwaukee to Chicago in 1914. Passengers sat on thin seats of dark wood as the train clacked along, the rough smell of coal smoke drifting back from the steam engine at the front of the train. Two of those passengers were a pair of not-so-young lovers, Tillie Klimek and her boyfriend, Joseph Guskowski. Tillie was pissed. She'd sprung for a romantic trip to Milwaukee in the hopes of getting a marriage proposal out of Joseph, but despite endless bratwurst and cheese curds and Schlitz that flowed like water, the question remained frustratingly unpopped. Showing Joseph a good time hadn't worked, so Tillie decided to try and scare a proposal out of him instead. She leaned forward, fixing Joseph with her steely eyes. In Polish, she basically said, "You should try to stay on my good side. My first two husbands, they didn't stay on my good side. They died, and they didn't die naturally." In fact, Tillie told Joseph that her previous two husbands had been repeatedly poisoned until they were dead. Poisoned by Tillie herself.
Hearing this did not actually encourage Joseph to step up and become husband number 3. Understandably, he just looked shocked. Tillie turned the screws tighter. If he didn't marry her, she'd see him prosecuted under the Mann Act. This law was theoretically intended to combat interstate human trafficking and prostitution, but included vague language targeting debauchery or any other immoral practice. And in theory, they could use it to prosecute perfectly consensual interstate nookie. Joseph pushed back. If Tillie wasn't careful, he'd go to the police and tell them she was a murderer. I can only assume the rest of the trip back to Chicago is pretty awkward, which tends to happen once you introduce mutually assured destruction into your relationship. Still, Tillie tried to patch things up with her beau, bringing over some candy for him and his sister, Stella. A few days later, Stella was deathly ill, and Joseph was just plain dead.
Oh, Lord.
Now, y'all, we've all heard not to take candy from strangers. I'd just like to add, don't take candy from admitted poisoners who you've just threatened to expose to the police.
Like, god dang, like, bless his heart, but what were you thinking, man? She's like, yeah, I'll kill you if you don't ask me to marry you. Here, have some candy. Really? I mean, bless his heart and everything, but dang.
Must have been some good candy.
I know, right?
Tillie arrived in Chicago in 1876 when she was just 1 year old, part of a wave of mostly poor Polish immigrants. Her family settled in what is now the Ukrainian Village neighborhood, which was called Little Poland at the time. It was an appropriate name. Tilly rarely had to speak English, and she'd never be fluent in it. In 1890, she married a man named John Mitkowitz. She was just 14 years old at the time, which A, wasn't uncommon back then, and B, yikes.
Yeah.
24 years of married life passed by. People in the neighborhood thought Tilly and John seemed happy. They were popular locally, and Tilly had a reputation as a great cook. Then, in January of 1914, John died of heart trouble. Retrospectively, there's no shortage of motive if you believe Tilly's claim of murdering John. She got $1,000 in life insurance. That'd be around $30,000 today. Not a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but we've seen people killed for less. And then there's the fact that someone other than John was plucking at Tilly's heartstrings. In February, a month after husband number 1 was in the ground, Tilly was married again to Joseph Ruskowski. The death of her first husband, John, wasn't a huge shock to the locals. See, Tilly had developed a reputation in the neighborhood as someone with a strange, creepy gift. She had prophetic dreams, morbid ones. When Tilly started having dreams about somebody dying, they'd usually be dead within a few weeks. Coincidentally, these dreams were usually about Tilly's annoying neighbors, stray dogs that barked too much, or anyone else who got on her bad side. A couple of weeks before her husband John died, Tilly started having dreams that he was sick with some terminal affliction.
Yeah, her. He had a terminal case of Tilly.
As for her new marriage to Joseph, to quote Commander Spock of the USS Enterprise, you may find that having is not so pleasing a thing, after all, as wanting. A month after the wedding, Tilly once again started to have disturbing dreams about her husband getting sick and dying. Joseph, a sturdy guy who had been the picture of health before he met Tilly, died on May 20th. Tilly inherited $1,200 in cash and $722 in insurance.
For the next few years, Tilly's story becomes kind of murky. We know she moved into an apartment on North Winchester Avenue with a man named Myers who went missing. Gee, I wonder what happened to him. Then, in 1919, Tilly married Frank Kupchik, and he moved in with her. As soon as he had, Tilly was telling her neighbors that Frank probably wasn't going to live long. As it happened, Frank lasted a little longer than Tilly's last husband. He didn't get sick until 2 years after the wedding. Not that they were living a life of bliss before that. Straight after the wedding, Tilly started smooching with a mysterious lover called John on the porch of her apartment building after Frank had gone to work. But by 1921, Tilly had her eye either on another man or on Frank's $1,000 life insurance policy, and she started having the forbidding dreams of death again. A couple of weeks later, Frank was incredibly ill. "It'll be any day now," Tilly told him. She was in high spirits. One afternoon, she bounced out of her apartment and happily shoved a newspaper under her landlady's nose. It showed an ad for a $30 coffin. "My man, he's only got 2 inches to live," Tilly said, delighted. She sat by Frank's bed, knitting a black hat. In Frank's rare lucid moments, Tilly waved the half-finished hat in front of his face. "I'm going to wear this at your funeral," she said. Damn, Tilly, that shit is cold, girl. This woman just kills me. She was so gleeful about it. It's just, wow. Frank died on April 25th. Before the funeral, as Frank lay in the $30 coffin in the living room, Tilly played dance music from her Victrola turntable and danced around. She grabbed Frank's ear and yelled into it, "You devil, you won't get up anymore." She got $675 in life insurance. One of those attending Frank's funeral was Joseph Klimek, a 50-year-old widower with a reputation in the community as a gentle, hard-working man. By the standards of Little Poland at the time, he was also wealthy. He barely knew Frank, but friends had been encouraging him to remarry and suggested he go to the funeral to get a close look at the newly single Tilly. Tilly had a fairly checkered reputation locally, but not because her husbands kept dropping dead. As far as the neighborhood was concerned, that was just evidence that Tilly's morbid psychic powers were the real deal. They were more concerned with the fact that there had been a lot of other men, both in between and alongside the husbands. Even in the freewheeling Chicago of the 20s, it was possible for a lady to have a little too much fun. Against that, in the eyes of a prospective husband, though, was Tilly's rep as a spectacular cook, and Tilly herself. Just to flash forward a little here, when Tilly would eventually go on trial, the Chicago papers, as was the style at the time, had a lot of cruel fun with Tilly's appearance, basically describing her as a lumpy peasant. Which she wasn't, but the standard of female beauty at the time was very much in the direction of soft and fey, and Tilly definitely wasn't that. But the fact was, she had men chasing after her entire life, and obviously Joseph Klimek liked what he saw at Frank's funeral, because 90 days later, he and Tilly were married. They had one happy year before things turned sour. These were the days of Prohibition, and like a lot of people, Joseph had a taste for moonshine. Tilly could live with that, but Joseph, especially when he was in his cups, had an eye for the ladies, too, and that was something Tilly would not put up with. She'd cheat on her men, but she wasn't going to let him cheat on her. When she complained to her cousin Nellie, Nellie said she should get a divorce. I'll get rid of him some other way, Tilly said. Nellie had very similar opinions to Tilly's when it came to removing people who make the road of your life bumpier than you'd like. Before her cousin left, Nellie handed her a tin labeled Rough on Rats, a poison you could buy at any corner drugstore. It was just arsenic mixed with coal dust to color it black.
Tilly, though, wanted to make sure she got some buck for her bang. She pestered Joseph to take out a life insurance policy. A couple weeks after he had done so, Joseph started to experience shooting pains in his legs and numbness in his arms. His breath smelled like garlic. A few weeks later, his legs were paralyzed.
Oh, Lord.
In one way, Joseph's wealth meant Tilly had potentially hit the jackpot. But another, it was to be her downfall. Her previous husbands hadn't had any other option than to stay home and let their loving wife nurse them through their illness, but Joseph had the money to call a doctor. The doctor immediately saw that Joseph was in serious danger and had an ambulance take him to Cook County Hospital. The doctors there suspected arsenic poisoning immediately, and tests told them that they were right on the money. When they spoke to Joseph, he told them his dogs had died after eating food Tilly had prepared for him, and that the soup she'd been giving him while he was sick had tasted strange. Hospital officials called the police, who arrested Tilly for attempted murder. She told the lieutenant who put the habeas corpus on her, "The next one I want to cook dinner for is you. You made all of my troubles."
Oh, wow. Man, you gotta hand it to her. She ain't caving in for nobody. She's got, like, evil moxie. Like, some kind of dark moxie.
Dark moxie.
She's got doxy.
Doxy? Apparently, not everyone in Little Poland had bought Tilly's psychic act. The police received anonymous letters saying they should dig up the body of Tilly's third husband, Frank, as well as cousin Nellie's first husband. Both bodies were riddled with arsenic, and Nellie was also arrested.
Oh, my Lord.
I don't know why, but authorities took Tilly to visit Joseph in the hospital. When he asked a nurse for a glass of water, Tilly yelled at her, "If he makes any trouble for you, take a 2x4 board and hit him over the head with it."
What the
Then she tenderly kissed Joseph goodbye, just deeply confusing the cops who were watching.
Holy crap. This is so weird.
This is like that like kind of misogynistic, like crazy hot ratio. Like meme. like where they say, you know, where does she lie on the crazy hot ratio? It exists for women too, except like, you know, you get fucking murdered if he's too crazy.
Yeah. Sometimes you get murdered anyway.
Yeah, you know.
As we're proving with this episode.
Right. The police were soon busy. After Tilly was arrested, 2 of her cousins came forward, saying when they were younger, 4 of their siblings had died after one of Tilly's dinner parties.
Oh my God.
Their mom and Tilly had been fighting, which was apparently motive enough for Tilly to kill her children. 2 neighbors said they'd almost died after Tilly had given them candy.
Jeez.
One had gotten into an argument with Tilly just one time. The other had been chatting to Joseph Klimek and had seen Tilly glaring at her.
Wow.
Tilly was charged for the murder of Frank Kupchak and cousin Nellie for the murder of her first husband. Accusations kept coming forward. When Nellie had given birth to twins during her first marriage, her husband had said they weren't his. One twin died at 8 months, the other a month later. At one point, Nellie's adult daughter decided to stick her nose in her mom's business and criticize her for something or other. Not long after, her own infant daughter died in a way that retrospectively looked suspiciously like arsenic poisoning.
Jeez.
Beyond these somewhat verifiable claims, there was a flood of reports about suspected poisonings all across Little Poland. Newspapers described it as the poison belt, and called Tilly the high priestess of the Bluebeard clique.
In jail, Nellie smiled a lot, spoke hardly any English, and frequently fell to pieces. Tilly, though, was all ice and defiance. She told reporters, "I didn't rob nobody. I didn't shoot nobody. I didn't poison nobody. I didn't kill nobody. I didn't. Everybody pick on me. Everybody make eyes at me like they're going to eat me. Why do they make eyes at me? I tell the truth." Oh my God, she's Tommy Wiseau. It's the room. "I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark." That's Tilly. "I didn't poison nobody. Oh, hi, Mark." The trial was a circus on both sides of the bench. The judge asked for a psychopathic lab report on both women, which determined they were both, quote, subnormal mentally. What seems likely is that the tests were in their second language, English, and didn't take that into account. And because one of Nellie's kids had previously been found to be, quote, of feeble mind, the judge declared, "If we had a field worker, a eugenics expert, to check up on the history of this whole family at the time one moron was discovered, then the police might have been warned to watch this woman. When we find one case, we can seek out and locate the nest." Holy crap. Every sentence in that was just god-awful. Ooh,
I feel like I need to get on Twitter and cancel somebody. I
know. Can we fight this and go back in time and, like, smack this guy around a little bit? Cheese and crackers. So, the nest. So you got that. If your cousin's kid is kind of weird, the police are going to be all up your ass. I don't think I even know my cousin's kids' names, but okay. All 3 of Tilly's former husbands had been exhumed, and all 3 showed evidence of arsenic poisoning. Tilly, wearing the black hat she'd made beside her dying husband Frank, denied killing them. "I loved them, they loved me," she said. "They just died, same as other people." The prosecutor wanted not only a conviction, but a death sentence, and made it clear to the all-male jury that they'd better watch their backs if they did anything less. "This defendant is like a good many other women in this town," he said. "She thinks she can get away with it. There are a lot of women, gentlemen, who are awaiting your verdict in this case." In fact, a lot of women solidly accused of murder in Chicago had been acquitted, most often after various levels of weeping and flirting in court. Tilly, stony and silent, did neither. She and Nellie were together in jail for a year before their respective verdicts came down. Tilly enjoyed tormenting her cousin. Whenever guards came to take Nellie away for something, Tilly whispered in Polish, "Oh, they're going to hang you today, Nellie." Her gullible cousin screamed as the guards dragged her out. This woman is bonkers. Like, she just delighted in evil. It's wild. Nellie actually wasn't hanged. In fact, her charges were dropped after a hung jury. By that time, Tilly had been convicted, and everyone seemed eager to put the poisoning spree behind them. Although everyone accepted that Tilly had an unknowably large count of victims, she was only convicted of Frank Kupchak's murder, for which she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. She apparently enjoyed prison, where she spent most of her time sewing. She said the food was better than she had at home, which I'm sure it was, because it wasn't full of fucking arsenic. She died in 1936 at the age of 60 behind bars. Now, after her conviction, another body was most likely added to the pile. Just a few years after Tilly went to the slammer, Joseph Klimek, the only husband to survive her, died apparently of tonsillitis, but his autopsy showed his body to be still absolutely steeped in arsenic, like he'd been marinating in it. She'd probably been dosing him for months before he died, so most likely that had weakened him enough that when he got sick a little bit, that was it. Now, moving on to case 2, poison in the Sun King's court. For this one, we're in Paris, France, July 17th, 1676. Marie-Madeleine Marguerite d'Aubray, the Marquise de Brinvilliers, sat stiffly in the cart as it rumbled over the cobblestone streets toward Notre Dame, pulled by the captors who had spent the last 5 hours torturing her. People lined the streets to watch the cart go by, and the Marquise saw many familiar faces. Noblemen and women she'd partied with and drank with, gossiped and danced with. If they expected her to be sobbing in terror, they were disappointed. The Marquise's eyes were full of fire. If you had to put a name to the expression on her face, you'd probably call it fury. People shouted at her as she rode past, "Murderess! Killer! You deserve to die!" When the cart reached its destination, a scaffold outside the cathedral, one of the Marquise's guards pulled her out and forced her onto her knees. "Say your penance," he said. She hesitated only for a moment, then spoke in a clear voice that rang out across the crowd of onlookers. "I confess that wickedly and for revenge I poisoned my father and my brothers and attempted to poison my sister to obtain possession of their goods. I ask pardon of God, the king, and my country's laws." Then she stood up, and the guards steered her to the scaffold. Her head was high and defiant as she climbed it. Her executioner was waiting for her there. As a priest whispered prayers in the Marquise's ear, the executioner shaved her head, lock after lock falling to the ground around her feet. Souvenirs for anybody fast enough to run up there and grab them after the deed was done. When she was bald, the executioner tore open the cheap shirt she was wearing, exposing her bare neck. Then he slipped the hood over her head. Marie began to pray out loud as the executioner raised his shiny sword, and then, shing! For a breathless moment, the Marquise's head stayed in place, and she remained standing like nothing had happened. But then, with a sound that I'm sure stayed in the minds of everyone watching for the rest of their lives, the head slid slowly off her neck and thumped to the ground, and the Marquise crumpled. She was dead. "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord," whispered the priest. "That was a smooth one, don't you think?" said the executioner, and took a swig of wine. After the beheading, the body of the late Marquise de Brinvilliers was burned on a pyre until it was nothing more than ashes and pieces of bone. This had been some top-tier entertainment for the Parisians who came to watch, and some of them stayed all the way to the end to watch her ashes blow away. Some people joked, "Now that we've breathed her in, we're going to have a sudden urge to murder." So, who was the Marquise de Brinvilliers, and how did she become public enemy number 1 in Paris? Well, Marie-Madeleine Marguerite d'Aubray grew up in a well-to-do family in Paris. Her dad was the city's civil lieutenant, which meant he made very good money and had quite a bit of influence, too. Marie was the oldest in the family. She had a younger sister and 2 younger brothers, and by all accounts, she was the star of all of them. She was pretty, with dark hair and blue eyes and a perfect complexion, and she was sharp as a knife. This was the age of King Louis XIV, aka the Sun King, and if you've ever seen the movie Dangerous Liaisons, you probably have a decent sense of what King Louis's court was like, even though that movie is set a little bit later. Basically, Paris high society in Louis's time was about as shallow, bitchy a place as you could possibly imagine. Reading about it, it honestly sounds like just about every nobleman and woman was basically a sociopath whose favorite sport was trying to ruin the other nobles. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of screwing around with people you weren't married to, a lot of gambling, a lot of partying, and a lot of plotting and scheming. Everybody was always spreading vicious rumors about everybody else. Reputations rose and fell so fast it could give you vertigo just watching it. It sounds like a private boarding high school for like little asshole trust fund teenagers, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Or Twitter.
Whoo boy, good times. When she was old enough, Marie leapt into the fray with glee and she fit right in. By the time she hit 21, she'd married a guy named Antoine Gobelin. Now, the main thing Marie liked about Antoine was his bank account and his title. Not only had the guy made bajillions in the dye manufacturing field, he was also a marquis, which meant she was now the Marquise of Brinvilliers. Nice.
They were a power couple, and they mostly seemed to get along okay, but it didn't take long before they were both having affairs. This was pretty much par for the course for the rich folks in 17th century Paris, though, so whatevs. I mean, taking a lover was one of the things that got you gossiped about, and if you weren't being gossiped about, what was the point of anything? There's a point in everybody's life when their whole future takes a turn, where nothing will ever be the same again. It might be because you took a new job, moved to a new city, or met a new friend. In Marie's case, her turning point was meeting Gaudin de Sainte-Croix. Sainte-Croix sounds like he spawned out of a trashy period romance novel. An officer in the Parisian army, gorgeous, brilliant, educated, and best of all, a bad boy.
Ooh, Lord. He sounds like quite the rapscallion.
A bodice ripper to the core. He and Marie fell for each other hard, and they didn't even try to hide their affair. Marie liked flaunting her hot new man, and neither one of them gave a shit about the gossipy courtiers. They thought the whole thing was kind of funny. They liked riding around town in a fancy carriage and making out in there.
God.
Somebody who did not find this funny was Marie's dad. He was a starchy sort of fella, and he didn't appreciate his married daughter just blatantly slutting it up all over Paris, which I feel like if you're gonna be a slut, Paris is kind of the place to go.
Absolutely, especially at that particular time. But it just cracks me up, that image of them riding around in the carriage and making out. It's like, that could be at any point in human history. Like, that could be 1950. It could be 1985. It could be right now.
Right now.
Two teenagers making out in the back of a car. Oh, I love it.
But Marie's dad thought it brought shame on his family's good name.
Yep.
His daughter's marriage wasn't going great anyway, even without the new boyfriend. Antoine was pretty much a gambling addict, and he was bleeding money like a sieve. So he lost a ton of his fortune, and before long, he had so many creditors after him that he had to flee the country.
Oh, jeez.
Marie had her own money from her dowry, but still, the whole thing was sordid. And Marie catting around town with this flashy young lover didn't help with the optics, especially because she was buying him extravagant gifts instead of like helping her hubs get out of debt.
Right.
So Daddy made a decision. At this time in France, if you had money and influence and you wanted somebody out of your hair, you could get what was called a lettre de cachet. Basically, a letter from the king ordering that this pest be put in jail. No trial or anything, apparently. Aren't monarchies fun?
It really does sound kind of nice, to be honest. I have a few people I'd like to get a lettre de cachet about.
So Marie's dad got one on poor Sainte-Croix, sent some guards to put the habeas corpus on him right in the middle of a date with Marie. Mr. Handsome was thrown in the Bastille, which I hear was not a very nice place. He was there for a few months, and it just so happened that in the cell right next to his was a guy named Exelie. Guess what Exelie was in there for?
Ooh, was it murder?
Yes, it was. Murder by poison. Dun, dun, dun. Now, our sexy, sexy bad boy, Sainte-Croix, had an interest in chemistry. So one day, these two got to talking, and Exelie shared everything he knew about the dark alchemy of poison. At least, that's what Marie claimed later. But she told other people that he learned it from a Swiss apothecary named Glacé. So who the hell knows what the truth was? I think it's just as likely that she learned it herself. She was a smart cookie, and I mean, you could buy poison at the drugstore.
I kind of hope it was Glacé, because his poison recipes were metal as hell. According to Tori Telfer, whose book Lady Killers was one of our sources for this case, one of them called for, quote, the skull of a man dead of a violent death. It's like, wee. I guess you were supposed to, like, crush it up? Holy shit.
Like, presumably this would be listed as an inactive ingredient on the child-proof bottle.
Oh, Lord. So when St. Croix finally got out of jail, he went running right back into the Marquise's loving arms. They were both super pissed at Marie's daddy for trying to put a wedge between them. Marie was so mad the day of her man's arrest that she threw an epic glass-smashing tantrum. That rage, plus a growing realization that her husband was gambling all his money away and her dowry wasn't going to last forever, made Marie pretty damn receptive when St. Croix sat her down one day and said, "So, babe, how about we poison your dad?" Yeah, so let me just boil this down. Your girlfriend's dad gets pissed off, has you thrown in the Bastille for stupping his daughter. You get out and immediately help your girlfriend poison the guy. Now that is some classic French revenge right there. Also, it reminds me of so many of the cases we've seen before where some teenage couple kills one of them's parents because they tried to prevent them from seeing each other, right? Mm-hmm. Unreal. So, using Marie's money, St. Croix rented some space and set up a laboratory. It was time to experiment with poisons. And for the next 3 years, they experimented by coming up with various formulas and testing them out. How did they test them, you ask? Well, Marie suddenly discovered her charitable side. She started paying visits to the sick and elderly at a nearby hospital, and coincidentally, that hospital's death rate took a bit of a spike. She also tried some of the poison out on one of her maids. The girl didn't die, but she got violently sick and her stomach wasn't right for years. I mean, what good were poor people's lives anyway, right? It was crucial for Marie and St. Croix that old daddy's death looked like natural causes, so they needed to check out the effects of their poisons ahead of time. They needed to find just the right one. Finally, they felt like they had the perfect formula. Inheritance powder, Marie called it, which is horrible. So horrible, but also just a little bit funny. Just a little bit. Now, interestingly enough, although the Marquise had been perfectly willing to poison the poor folks herself, she decided not to get her delicate hands dirty with her daddy. Instead, she sent a mole, bribed a servant to start dosing the poor old guy with the inheritance powder, the main ingredient of which was arsenic. The year, by the way, was 1666. Ooh, evil. Over the next 8 months, the servant poisoner fed Marie's father dose after dose of poison, little by little. The amount of suffering this must have caused, we can only imagine. Sick all the time, but not sick enough to die yet. Just in horrible gastrointestinal distress all the time, getting weaker and not knowing why. Poison might seem like a kinder, gentler way to kill somebody than like stabbing or something, until you really learn what it does to people. I'd rather be shot in the head any old day. When she felt like she had her dad on the ropes, Marie took a little carriage ride out to the family estate and took over the poisoning duties. I guess maybe she was feeling a little left out of the process, wanted to finish the old guy off herself. While playing the loving daughter, mopping his brow and sympathizing with his awful stomach pains, Marie fed him more arsenic, day by day. And in September of 1666, Monsieur d'Aubray breathed his last. The coroner listed the cause of death as gout. The young lovers had succeeded. Marie inherited 1/4 of her wealthy papa's estate. It was all shared out among the siblings. Now, Marie and St. Croix were a lot of things, but frugal wasn't one of them. It only took them a few years to blaze through every penny of that inheritance money. And when the bank account started running low, they started looking around for the next financial opportunity. It was time to break out the inheritance powder once again.
Lucky for Marie, she had 3 whole siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, who were a lot better with money than she was. Her sister was actually a nun, so she didn't have a lot of expenses, and her 2 brothers lived together. The older brother was married, and Marie and his wife had hated each other on sight. The sis-in-law must have had good radar. She disliked Marie so much that our girl figured she'd better not try and sneak into the kitchen to dose the food. That bitch would be onto her like white on rice. So she and the boyfriend decided to plant another servant/assassin to do the dirty work for them, a guy named La Chaussee. This guy was a piece of work in his own right, a former lackey of St. Croix with a rap sheet and a dead-eyed stare. Apparently, he'd do anything for a paycheck. If Marie's father's slow death sounded awful, it was nothing compared to what she put her brothers through. As Tori Telfer put it, we're talking months of suffering, vomiting, inability to eat, cramps, loss of eyesight, bloody stools, swelling, weight loss, and a constant fire gnawing away at their stomachs. Their bodies grew so stinking and infected that it was hard to be in the room with them.
Oh, my holy God, those poor dudes. Ugh.
It really makes you feel like there was more to this than greed. Greed was part of it, certainly, but there was something else in the mix along with it. Vengeance. Marie's brothers had been firmly on Dad's side when he tried to separate her from Sainte Croix. They'd made her feel like a filthy slut. I think she wanted to make them pay.
And look, this in no way even slightly excuses what Marie did, so do not come at me. That is not the point I'm making here. But this was a time when women had basically no rights. Marie's family pressured her into marrying a guy she didn't love, and they put the guy she did love in the Bastille. I don't think it's an accident that this period in history saw an incredible rash of poisonings, usually men at the hands of women who wanted to get away from them.
Yeah, and men could do whatever they wanted. They could have whatever mistress they wanted, and women couldn't do the same. So there's there's levels to it. Again, it does not excuse murder. And they could
ask for a divorce, but we couldn't. They could say, I don't want this woman anymore. But what are you supposed to do? If you can't own your own property, you can't have a job,
The options are limited. Again, does not excuse murder. I'm sorry.
Absolutely not. No. If the options are either live in quiet desperation or commit murder, I say live in quiet desperation, okay? Mm-hmm. But I'm saying I can see it. There were so many poisonings around this time, and I see why.
It's not that she didn't have resources either. She could have just kept
Marie
sex with Sainte Croix. It's not like she's a terrible example. She could have kept he got out of the Bastille, and she could have just kept sleeping with him in secret, just not going on voyeur carriage rides around Paris, whatever. The brothers died a few months apart, and since they were so young and healthy before this, they both had autopsies done. The results were pretty suspicious. This is disgusting, so take a breath. These poor guys had basically just rotted inside. Their GI tracts were gangrenous and falling apart, and the coroner felt like they'd been poisoned.
Oh my God.
But for whatever reason, he didn't pursue it. Maybe because poisoning was so hard to prove back then? Read The Poisoner's Handbook by Deborah Blum if you want to get an inside look on why poisoners were so hard to catch until 100 years ago. It's super fascinating. It was also partly because they didn't have a suspect. Our Madame de Brinvilliers made sure she wasn't anywhere near the brothers when they died, and La Chaussee had everybody convinced he was loyal to the core and would never dream of hurting anybody in the family. So, once again, Marie and her boy toy scooped up more of the family inheritance. It pissed Marie off that her sister-in-law got some of the money too, but she couldn't kill everybody at once. It would look too suspicious. She decided she'd get her brother's widow later.
And in the meantime, she turned her attention to her biological sister, who had taken her holy orders and was happily ensconced at a convent and sitting on a shitload of money. Money Marie felt belonged in her bank account instead. It might be a bit tricky to poison somebody in a convent, though, so it was going to take a little strategizing. But there was a bit of a problem beginning to rear its ugly little snout. The bloom had started to wilt off the rose a little bit in her relationship with Sainte Croix. Now, buckle up for this, y'all, because it's my favorite part of this story by far. After years of torrid, forbidden love, Marie kind of wanted Sainte Croix to make an honest woman out of her. Well, I mean, not honest, but she did want him to put a ring on it. And to do that, she knew she'd have to get rid of her degenerate gambler of a husband, Antoine. So she got to work, putting the magic formula into his food and drinks. But here's the thing. Sainte Croix was not in support of this whole marriage thing. He liked things just the way they were. Having sex, plotting murder, spending lots and lots of Marie's money on him. He enjoyed being Marie's kept man, but he didn't want to be tied down, babe. So, for months, he and Marie played this perpetual game where she'd poison poor Antoine and Sainte Croix would come in and slip in the antidote before he could expire. They did this 5 or 6 times. Marie would just about have Antoine on the ropes, then Sainte Croix would come in and give him the cure. Back and forth like Satan's ping pong table. How Antoine didn't catch on to this, I can't imagine. He doesn't sound too bright, bless his heart. Too busy losing at cards, I guess. The really wild thing about this is, although Marie acted like a total drama queen about this whole thing, writing St. Croix a letter threatening to poison herself if he didn't marry her, she'd actually already started seeing another guy on the side.
Girl. Oh my God.
Now she's cheating on two guys, the skank. She met Jean-Baptiste Briancourt when she hired him as a tutor for her kids, and it didn't take her long to move in on him. Now, this guy was as different from St. Croix as humanly possible. He was like a good person and stuff, at least compared to Marie and St. Croix, but then again, that's a pretty low bar. But he was like a normal guy. Briancourt was besotted with the Marquise at first, but our girl was not using her head. She'd always been pretty loose-lipped about her hobby as a poisoner. She'd let plenty of little jokes slip at parties over the years, but while her courtier friends were apparently fine with murder and mayhem, Briancourt was shocked when she started talking about poison. I guess Marie assumed her new side piece would be as cool with her serial killer resume as St. Croix had always been. But he was not. He was scared shitless, and he started getting paranoid. Would she kill him too? Nah, surely not. And then one night, Briancourt showed up to Marie's bedroom a little earlier than they'd planned and caught her shoving an annoyed St. Croix into the closet. Get in there, hide. Busted. So Briancourt stormed over to the closet door. Marie tried to distract him by pulling him onto the bed, then tried to block the way to the closet, then just straight up jumped on his back and screamed, No, don't open that or I'll poison myself.
Oh my God.
But Briancourt knew what he'd just seen, and he yanked open the closet door to find boyfriend number one staring right at him. This confirmed our poor young tutor's worst suspicions. You're here to kill me, he screamed at St. Croix, and hauled ass out of the room, out of the house, and out of town. And that was it for that relationship. Smart man. As you can imagine, this didn't do her romance with St. Croix any favors either. He was firmer than ever now about not wanting to marry her. And then in 1672, the bastard went and died on her. Of natural causes, Marie didn't kill him. Who was going to help her kill her sister now, damn it? Rude. And somehow, St. Croix managed to die with his reputation intact. Nobody knew about his crimes except the Marquise and that servant that they paid off.
And that would have been good for Murray, but our boy had left some treasure behind. He died with some pretty hefty debts, so after the funeral, a judge sent a court official over to his house to go through his accounts and settle his estate. And much to his surprise, the guy found a scroll all tied up with "My Confession" scribbled on the outside. Like Whitney said, St. Croix wasn't a suspect in any crimes at this point, so the accountant dude decided to respect the dead man's privacy. He threw the scroll into the fireplace and let it burn.
Oh my God, really? I'd have read that shit immediately. You guys have to let me know if you would have. I guess I'm not as good a person as this dude because I would have had that thing ripped open in 5 seconds flat. I'd already have my popcorn, my soda. I'd be ready for the hot goss. And you know, the guy said later that he threw it in the fire because he felt it was a private confession from a dying man to his God, right? But I kind of feel like God loves us and he wants us to have the hot goss. So I don't think God would mind me snooping.
God doesn't need you to write down your confession.
Well, yeah, God knows already, right?
Yeah. But anyway, I'm with you, Whitney. I would have read it. And in fact, Whitney, I will read your search history and then immediately delete it afterwards because I got your back.
You.
But I'm reading that shit first.
Well, obviously.
Come on. God. But the scroll wasn't all he found. St. Croix had also left behind a carved wooden box. When the accountant opened it, he found it full of little glass bottles and tiny envelopes full of some kind of powder. He also found some sealed envelopes that all said, "To be burned in the event of my death," and on top of everything, a note. It said that in the event of St. Croix's death, he wanted the box and everything in it to go to the Marquise de Brinvilliers, and the things in there concerned her and her alone and were nobody else's business. If the Marquise was not around, the box was to be burned. Also was an envelope marked, I love this. Sundry curious secrets.
Wow. I bet that dude was kicking himself for burning that scroll now, huh?
This all looked suspicious as hell, so the court gathered it all up and turned it over to the police. Before they even had a chance to go through it, our girl Marie somehow got wind of the box and beat the land speed record, hauling ass to the police station to demand they return it to her.
I bet she did.
If she hadn't shown up all freaked out and crazy-eyed, they might have given it to her, but the way she was acting only convinced the police that they were sitting on something sinister. They sent Marie away with a whole swarm of bees in her bonnet and started testing the liquids and powders they found in the box. And I hate this part. They fed several of them to animals to see what would happen.
No.
When all of the animals died, it confirmed their suspicions about what was in the vials and envelopes. Poison. It didn't take long for word to spread about the box full of death. Anybody who had thought the Marquise was joking about inheritance powder all those years now realized, yeah, she wasn't.
Yeah.
When Marie's sister-in-law found out, she flipped her shit. She'd never liked or trusted Marie, and now she was convinced the bitch had murdered her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't take her long to realize who'd done the dirty work either. Their trusty servant, La Chaussee. She raised a huge outcry, having La Chaussee arrested and demanding the cops arrest the Marquise too.
It took them a few years, though, because Marie had gone on the lam as soon as she realized she was about to be found out. But eventually they got her and hauled her in. In typical Marie fashion, she tried to kill herself by swallowing glass, but she must not have tried very hard because it didn't even a little bit work. By now, the investigation had uncovered not only the poisonings of her family members, but her visits to the local hospitals, too. Some sources put the number of people she poisoned there as high as 100, though I don't think we have any way of knowing for sure. At her trial, Marie was defiant and steely-eyed. When her old boyfriend, Briancourt, testified against her, she glared at him and called him a coward. She showed hardly any emotion, even when she took the stand and admitted to killing her father and brothers, and pretty much just creeped out the whole of Paris. And of course, the verdict was guilty. Marie was sentenced to death by beheading. But before her execution, they wanted to have a little word with her to see if she had any more secrets she'd like to confess. Like, for example, involvement in a poisoning ring. In her confession, she'd talked about selling poison to another woman who had somebody she wanted rid of. Could this be part of something bigger? The justice system in 17th century France was not kind, and in order to get her to confess and repent, they put Marie through the literal ringer. They went, and I mean this with all seriousness, medieval on her ass. There was this form of torture that was basically like ye olde waterboarding, where they'd bend you backwards, shove a funnel in your mouth, and pour gallons of water down it. And then they did this awful thing they called breaking you on the wheel, which just sounds horrific. They stripped you naked, tied you to this big wheel thing, and just beat the crap out of you with metal bars. Now, torture as a means of extracting information is pitifully ineffective because people will say anything to get out of that kind of pain. But there was no doubt about Marie's guilt. Not only had she talked about her crimes freely to all sorts of people, they also found a pages-long written confession in her bedroom when they arrested her. Even after hours of torture, Marie didn't give up anything extra, though. So her captors gave up, and we know the rest of the story. The Marquise's story had captivated all of Paris. People followed it the way we'd follow a murderous Kardashian now, and it ended up having long-reaching effects. It kicked off years of poison witch hunts, with people getting accused right and left, both rightly and falsely, of poisoning, of participating in witchcraft, holding black masses. It was a lot like the weird satanic panic of the 1980s. And King Louis was so distressed about all this torrid stuff going on in his court that he ended up dissolving it. No more fun allowed, it's too much bad press. So for one psychopath, Marie did a hell of a lot of damage. And look, we're still telling her story today. The two women in today's episode could not have been more different. One came from a world of opulence and luxury, a beautiful young woman who got pretty much everything she wanted. She made sure of it. The other was from a much poorer, humbler world, but both resorted to the darkest art to get what they wanted. Revenge or money or both. and both embodied the total opposite of what women were supposed to be, kind and nurturing and selfless. It's interesting to me that the weapon in both of these cases was food and drink, delivered by the gentle hands of someone the victim trusted. We've seen it a million times by now, in cases today and cases from hundreds of years in the past. Charm is a verb, and you trust it blindly at your peril. So that was a wild one, right, campers? 2 wild ones, in fact. We'll have another one for you next week. But for now, lock your doors, light your lights, and stay safe until we get together again around the True Crime Campfire. And as always, we want to send a grateful shout out to a few of our lovely patrons. Thank you so much to Holly, Erica, Jessie, Laura, Donuts, Helen from Down Under, and Nightmare Jackie. We appreciate y'all to the moon and back. And if you're not yet a patron, you're missing out. Patrons of our show get every episode ad-free at least a day early, sometimes even 2, plus tons of extra content like patrons-only episodes and hilarious post-show discussions. And once you hit the $5 and up categories, you get even more cool stuff. A free sticker at $5, a rad enamel pin or fridge magnet while supplies last at $10, virtual events with Katie and me, and we're always looking for new stuff to do for you. So if you can, come join us at patreon.com/truecrimecampfire. And if you haven't booked your spot on the Crime Wave True Crime Cruise from November 3rd through November 7th, get on it, y'all. Join Katie and me, plus Last Podcast on the Left, Scared to Death, and Sinisterhood for a rockin' good time at sea. You can pay all at once or set up a payment plan, but you've got to have a fan code to book a ticket. So go to crimewaveatsea.com/campfire and take it from there.